Tiens, on a découpé une femme en morceaux rue de la bienséance à 2 pas du chat. Tiens, on a découpé une...
I am a feminist.
Je vous obsède avec une constance
je ne suis pas conduit
qui appelle quand même l'admiration.
D'une façon conforme à ce qu'on attend d'une jeune fille d'abord et d'une femme ensuite.
I'm sorry that I didn't become the world's first black classic pianist.
Donald Trump.
Je crois qu'une femme qui existe dans son temps, à l'intérieur de son temps, n'a pas d'époque, elle marque son époque.
Welcome to La Poudre, an intimate, in-depth conversation with inspiring women. They are artists or activists. They are creative. They're powerful. How did they become women? What books did they read? What fights did they fight? What do they scream? What do they dream? I am Lorraine Bastide, and today my guest is Leïla Slimani.
Well, at my own level, I fight by writing. My pen is my weapon.
One day of June, I received a book in my mailbox. It was Lullaby from Leïla Slimani. It was a signed copy in which I could read from E's mom to M's mom. I'll only pronounce the initials of our kids' names because I'd rather leave them out of this. I didn't know Leïla very well at that time. I only knew that our kids attended the same school. And each time I ran into her, I was always overwhelmed by her elegance. And then I read the book this summer, and I felt anger towards Leïla. I was angry at her because I don't like having my feelings manipulated. That is why I very often storm out of the movies when the emotions are too strong. After reading Lullaby, I didn't sleep well for a whole month. In a few moments, you will hear an extract of this heart-tearing book, read by Leïla Slimani herself. Lullaby is a masterpiece, which received the very prestigious Goncourt Prize. It is the first time my guest in La Poudre is a Goncourt Prize winner. Classy, isn't it? With Leïla Slimani, we talked about Morocco, the bobos, and maternal instinct. Leïla Slimani, habituellement, dans La Poudre, on essaye d'être sur le temps. Leïla Slimani, usually in La Poudre, we avoid commenting the daily news in order to focus on timeless subjects. But in your case, it is really difficult not to talk about current events. Your second novel, Lullaby, just won the Goncourt Prize. And a few days ago, the ex-prime minister announced he was running for presidency with a speech mentioning your name. How are you doing, Leïla?
Je vais très bien. Effectivement, oui, l'actualité pour moi est assez chargée.
I am very well. Indeed, I received the Goncourt a month ago, yet it almost feels far away. Regarding Manuel Valls, I took him mentioning me with amusement, since he included me in a group of authors who are so prestigious. It's intimidating. He spoke about French, he spoke about French culture, he spoke about Victor Hugo, about Rabelais, and this freshly arrived Leïla Slimani.
Et de cette Leïla Slimani, voilà, nouvellement arrivée sur la scène littéraire.
Are you a political person?
Yes, I am a political person, meaning I take interest in how we live together in a society. I am a political animal, as philosophy put in. However, I'm less and less politician. When I was in Sciences Po, I took a lot of interest in political parties' life. I read everything about it in the media, the little stories, the little polemics fascinated me. Today, not at all.
You were born in Rabat, you grew up in Morocco. What was it like to grow up there?
C'était très bien. Enfin, moi, j'ai eu une enfance plutôt heureuse.
It was very good. I had quite a happy childhood. I grew up in a city who was the capital and a provincial town all at once. Rabat was small and very calm, very quiet. Plus, Morocco in the 90s was different from today. It was King Hassan II Morocco, a very monitored country with a very authoritarian power. The medias, the television, all of that was regulated. I live in the city of the royal palace, of diplomats, politicians, and public officials. It was also a very calm city where people tended to do things at home. A very modest city I grew up in. Most of the time, hanging at home with my friends, and we made the most of the nice weather, of nature, of my grandparents who lived in the countryside, and whom I often visited. Thus, a quite peaceful and happy childhood.
De mes grands-parents qui habitaient à la campagne, que j'allais beaucoup voir. Donc, une enfance plutôt paisible et heureuse.
Vous aviez conscience de ce...
Were you aware of the censorship when you were a child?
Oui, j'en avais conscience. Enfin,
Yes, my awareness started rising when I became a teenager because it was impossible to ignore the fact that we had to be careful of what we said in public places. I could see at my parents' attitude that our telephone was tapped, for instance. It was public knowledge. We knew that at the coffee shop, half other people were part of the police. We could never read the newspapers because they were simply unreadable, filled with nonsense, just like the Soviet Russia's Pravda. But since we were outsiders, we almost made fun of the situation. We were quite ironic about it. We perfectly knew what happened to political opponents. The off-care case had just occurred. We were actually witnessing the end of the reign. Things got a little better. While I was in high school in 1998, a government of alternance took place. Morocco started to open up. And then, when I arrived in France, Hassan II died.
What kind of parents were your parents? How did they talk to you when you were a little girl?
ils nous parlaient comme à des...
They would talk to us, I'd say, they would talk to us like adults, but it's not quite right. They would talk to us like they were talking to reasonable, intelligent beings gifted with common sense. They would never talk to us like we were babies, intellectually inferior or responsible beings. They would always try to elevate us. They were very demanding intellectually. They never treated us like stupid. And they passed on a lot too. We could always debate. Dinners at home were very animated. We spoke a lot. In Morocco, especially in some backgrounds, children are often raised separately from their parents. They wouldn't necessarily have dinner with them. There is a lot of respect for parents and elderly people in general, which leads to less sharing, especially on private matters. My parents were the exact opposite. And I had many friends, and they loved coming over because we would always laugh together so much. They found it so surprising. We could totally tell my father, "What you are saying is nonsense, I disagree." Conversation could get heated, but we were always allowed to speak our minds.
Alors, on pouvait s'échauffer et tout, mais on avait toujours le droit de parler. Et ça, mes parents appréciaient beaucoup.
And your mother, who I think was a doctor, what kind of woman was she?
Ma mère, c'est une femme...
My mother was a very independent woman. She was a fighter and very ambitious too. She worked a lot when we were little girls. I remember her leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. She was very passionate about her work, and she transmitted us that passion. Passion for science, but above all human. She loved the human dimension of her work, plus practicing medicine in the 90s in Morocco meant taking care of a population that could not afford medical treatment. It is still the case today. Offering quality care to people who cannot afford it can put you in difficult moral and human situations.
Social dilemmas.
Exactly, social dilemmas. It was complicated, and my mother was keen on passing this on to us. At night, she will tell us, "Today I examined a 16-year-old girl whose parents cannot afford to pay for her chemotherapy. She told me, I don't want to see my parents in debt, so I'm going to let myself die." When you are 12 or 13 and your mother tells you that kind of story, it makes you aware of things. My mother treated street children, domestic violence survivors, as an ENT specialist. She took care of people who had lost their hearing as a result of great violence, terrible stories. It influenced me very much. She had such a humanistic, noble vision of things.
She was committed.
Very politically committed. My mother was also someone who was and still is greatly loved. When we were walking in the streets, countless people would come up to her and greet her, kiss her. In Morocco, it's very common to kiss the hand or the shoulder of someone who does good. She was known as a woman who took care of patients for free, especially children. So yes, I admired my mother a lot.
It must have been a kind of pressure to have such a mom.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, but it also gives you wings. I am not very sensitive to pressure. I have a tendency to look at things the opposite way. I was lucky enough to have an extraordinary model. The only effect it had was to push me forward. To me, having a depressed mother who spends her days drinking, complaining, would have a tendency to create more pressure because you simply don't know where to go. My mother opened up so many paths to me, on a moral basis, on an intellectual basis, on a human basis, that I felt no pressure at all. All I had to do was to behave the way I had always witnessed her behaving. It's like to have parents whose example you can follow.
Were you born a woman, or did you rather become one?
I think I became one. I was born a girl, that I know for sure. I mean it was not a boy, I was a girl. I was born with a female sex. In a 3-girls family, a matriarchal family in which my mother was very involved, as well as my grandmother. And my dad found himself surrounded by women. He never had a son, and I think it was difficult for my dad, considering how patriarchal Morocco is as a country. I didn't identify as a boy, and therefore I was a potential source of disappointment for my father. I was a girl, and I became a woman later on. I really think I became a woman intellectually by my readings and also by becoming a mother. I feel like you become a woman when you start looking for a job, when you enter society. You become a woman when you start appearing like a social being.
And you entered the Paris Institute of Political Science in 1998, is that it?
I got into Sciences Po in 1999 after a year of preparatory studies.
What kind of young woman were you? What were your dreams?
I was very rebellious, very, very honest, very passionate, quite a party animal. I loved taking risks. I was almost not afraid of anything. I was very social. I made a lot of friends. And at the same time, I have always had this lonely side. I took great pleasure in being alone, going for walks alone, doing my own things. And yes, I had big dreams. Although I wouldn't necessarily articulate them, I trusted my lucky star or my destiny. I knew that if I followed my instinct and worked hard, because I've always been rigorous, I've always believed in hard work, I knew great things would happen.
You had faith in your own destiny.
Yeah, in a way. I've always believed in my destiny. I always felt like I had something to do, which is probably related to my education. My parents would always tell me, if you really want it, if you really believe in it, you can do it. I never listened to anyone telling that's nonsense or that's impossible or your dreams are too big or that's not the way it goes. I followed my desires. I followed my path.
And you became a journalist.
Yes, exactly. I became a journalist, and after that I kept changing my mind a lot. When I graduated from Sciences Po, I thought about doing international politics, and at the time I was fascinated by Europe, which might seem strange today. I thought of it as a big dream, a very beautiful dream.
I know that dream.
Exactly.
We're the same generation, you and me.
Exactly. In 2002, 2004, Europe was this marvelous thing. I told myself the future was going to be extraordinary, that becoming an international civil servant would be marvelous. And then the year I graduated from Sciences Po, my father died, so I went back to Morocco for a while to help my mother get things in order. That's when I met a young Moroccan director, and at that time, it was right after the King Mohammed VI's ascension to power. People were starting to talk about the Naida, often referred to as the Moroccan Movida. It was an explosion of freedom, of creativity, of culture amongst the Moroccan youth. A lot of young directors started making movies, started music bands and all that. So I decided to stay in Morocco. I shooted a movie, then I went back to Paris and I took up acting classes in the Cours Florent. Since I had been studying for a long time, I decided to let myself enjoy this well-deserved break. I focused on artistic things and it was good, and then it was time to find a job. So I became a journalist at the Jeune Afrique journal.
Were you disappointed by this profession?
C'est pas que c'est un métier qui m'a déçue, c'est-à-dire
It didn't exactly disappoint me, but I quickly realized I wanted to do this job in a very intense, complete way. If I was to be a journalist, I needed to be the best. I wanted to do things the best way possible. And I quickly understood that I couldn't do it. I wasn't disappointed at the job, I was disappointed at myself doing the job. I realized I didn't have the qualities to become an international reporter. You know, the cliché of it, who covers war and get the Goncourt Prize. Because it's a physically and morally hard job. Very time-consuming too. If there's something big news to cover, your life just has to stop.
You have to drop everything.
Yes, you have to drop everything and go there. I wasn't ready to make that sacrifice, and when my son was born, I realized I couldn't afford to spend 3 weeks, a month, in Africa or in North Africa anymore. It wasn't for me. I mean, people who spent 40 years reporting end up being very tired people with chaotic family lives. And I wanted to build a steady and fulfilling family life that would later on allow me to be fulfilled by my job.
I'm asking you because the main character of your first novel, Dans le jardin de l'ogre, in the ogre's garden, Adèle, is a journalist, and she doesn't find excitement in her job. Is that what was missing? Excitement?
So Adèle is excessive. She's also very passive, very lazy. I thought it would be interesting to create that type of female character. To me, that passivity is the most interesting part of her. Not necessarily her sexuality. And also the fact that she doesn't care about pretty much anything. She goes with the flow, and that's very poorly viewed. Modern women have to be fighters. They have to take things in hand. Passive women are perceived as losers or failures. I really feel like there is a particularly harsh gaze on female passivity, whereas perhaps a man would be easily forgiven for it.
Yeah, I'd be called a good-natured person.
Yes, exactly. Everyone would say he's a good-natured person, that he has a lot of questioning going on, that he's got depth. Femininity is being fully redefined lately, and I thought it would be interesting to set up a character who's very passive, very lazy, who doesn't find any fulfillment in her job.
She's lazy, and she's also kind of addicted to sex.
Yes, of course.
Adèle is a slut.
Yes, from a lot of people's point of view, she's a slut. But above all, she's a very unhappy woman. She's a lonely woman, a woman looking for something. There is a huge void inside of her. She has an acute feeling of her own loneliness, and she's looking to fill this void. But she has no idea what could actually fill it. She doesn't know where she's going. She feels a perpetuous vertigo. And then sexuality progressively becomes an addiction. It drives her from one situation to another. But she has actually lost control. She endures. It doesn't bring her any kind of satisfaction. There is absolutely no form of real seduction. She's into some sort of a sexual consumption, and as soon as it is consumed, she needs to move on to the next thing. She needs more.
When you wrote this book, you were 32 years old. It's kind of late for a first novel. What makes you wake up one day and say, I'm a writer?
Well, it's late, and at the same time, it's not late. It's in the general average, actually. Most of first novels are written around that age, 32 years old. And I think it really makes sense, because at that age, You're out of your teenage years, which is youth in its freest, fastidious, and sometimes also very naive form. And you already entered some form of adulthood without being completely damaged by it. I think it is the perfect situation to write, because you kept youth's enthusiasm but lost its naivety literature can't bear. Literature can't afford soft words.
De naïveté que la littérature ne supporte pas du tout. Et les bons sentiments que la littérature ne supporte pas.
Alors, au sujet de ce premier... Moroccan author Tahar Benjeloun wrote a very beautiful article about this book. He wrote, "She's a Moroccan woman who dares and handle things without caution. A Moroccan woman who dares." Was it worth being highlighted?
Oui, finalement.
Yes, I think it was. A while ago, I would have said it wasn't, but now I've been to Morocco often to talk about my books, and young people come up to me and talk to me about daring. They tell me they wish they could write too, or become, for example, actors or direct movies, but they don't dare to do it because the family's pressure is too strong, because social pressure is too strong. They're afraid to get into a fight with their parents, to get into a fight with their friends who wouldn't understand. At the end of the day, they see me as an example of someone who dared and hasn't lost everything, who didn't become an outcast because of her choices. And it's a good thing. Being able to show young people that, well, first of all, daring is not necessarily about doing something crazy or being scandalous or provocative. It doesn't have to be about conflict. Showing that you can trust your audience, that people are capable of understanding your approach, and that even if there's conflict, well, it is worth it. So at the end of the day, yes, it is worth being highlighted because Maghrebian societies are societies in which moving beyond the norm is daring, especially when you are a woman. I think it was interesting to highlight it, yes.
De la norme, on n'ose pas sortir du groupe, encore plus quand on est une femme. Donc, je pense que oui, c'est intéressant de le souligner.
I ran across an article you wrote last summer in Jeune Afrique. You wrote, "Lately in Morocco, we talked about sex a lot. From Amina Filali to Nadar's kiss, from Jennifer Lopez's panties to Lubna Abidar's. A few reminders for our listeners. Amina Filali was a young girl who was raped at 15. She had to marry a rapist and then committed suicide in 2012. Lubna Abidar is the actress of Much Loved, a movie about prostitution in Morocco. The movie got censored and Lubna was assaulted in Casablanca. Nadar's Kiss is the story of 3 teenagers sued for posting a picture of 2 people kissing on Facebook. What you're talking about in this story is French sociologist Michel Foucault's theory. It is biopower, the idea that in order to control society, conservatives will focus their attention on sexuality. You're talking about Morocco, but if you look at France and the Manif pour tous, an anti-gay marriage lobby, it's the same thing. How do we fight against these people?
Well, at my own level, I fight by writing. My pen is my weapon, and it's more powerful than we tend to imagine. Concerning Morocco, I'm going to publish a book next fall, in September 2017, titled Sexe and Lies. It is already written, already printed, and it retraces 2 years of sex cases and sexual scandals in Morocco, interspersed with conversations I had with Moroccan women who told me about their sexualities. It helped me realize how wrong we would be to reduce body control to religious fantasies. How wrong it is to think that because you are a Muslim, you are culturally programmed to control desire in your body and that only secularization and laicity will end up changing this. It's not that simple. Morocco and Muslim countries' history prove that there has been times of great liberation on the physical and sexual aspect, and on the contrary, periods of great frustrations, of profound hostility to freedom. And the same goes for France. If you pay attention, you'll realize that today there is an alarming conservative anti-abortion speech that has freed itself, and what is even more alarming is the complete lack of reaction to it.
finalement de réaction ou la tiédeur des réactions par rapport à ça. Alors,
Meanwhile, in Poland, thousands of women are taking on the streets to fight for a right that the Polish government is trying to take away from them. And meanwhile, all over the world, thousands of women are fighting to obtain that right in the first place. Nowadays, we have such a bourgeois vision of feminism and femininity, thinking, oh, that's nothing. They'll never be able to take this away from us. It's ours. I don't think so. I am worried. And I know that in general, in times of crisis, it is the weakest, the most vulnerable people who are attacked. It is the minorities who are attacked. It is the women who are attacked. It is the immigrants who are attacked. And women would better be way more careful when it comes to their rights because, well, you are a little more protected when you live in the center of Paris or big cities, but go ahead and try to getting an abortion in the suburbs or in a small provincial town. It's a true obstacle race and it's very complicated and a lot of people work hard to make it more and more complicated. I think it's time to open our eyes on this situation.
I agree.
Alors, on arrive à chanson douce.
So we have to come to Lullaby. And Leïla, I have to confess, your book prevented me from sleeping for days, or maybe months. Would you agree to read the first 2 pages? It won't even be a spoiler because it's the first 2 pages of the book.
No problem. So I almost know them by heart.
I imagine you're often asked to read them.
No, it's mostly because I read them over and over again while working on the book.
Le bébé est mort.
The baby is dead. It took only a few seconds. The doctor said he didn't suffer. The broken body, surrounded by toys, was put into a grey bag, which they zipped shut. The little girl was still alive when the ambulance arrived. She'd felt like a wild animal. They found signs of a struggle, bits of skin under her soft fingernails. On the way to the hospital, she was agitated, her body shaken by convulsions. Eyes bulging, she seemed to be gasping for air. Her throat was filled with blood. Her lungs had been punctured, her head smashed violently against the blue chest of drawers. They photographed the crime scene. They dusted for fingerprints and measured the surface area of the bathroom and the children's bedroom. On the floor, the prince's rug was soaked with blood. The changing table had been knocked sideways. The toys were put in transparent bags and sealed as evidence. Even the blue chest of drawers will be used in the trial. The mother was in state of shock. That's what the paramedics said, what the police repeated, what the journalists wrote. When she went into the room where the children lay, she let out a scream from deep within, the howl of a she-wolf. It made the walls tremble. Night fell on this May Day. She vomited, and that was how the police found her, squatting in the bedroom, her clothes soiled, shuddering like a mad woman. She screamed her lungs out. The ambulance man noted discreetly and they picked her up, even though she resisted and kicked out at them. They lifted her slowly to her feet, and the young female trainee paramedic administered a tranquilizer. It was her first month on the job. They had to save the other one too, of course, with the same level of professionalism, without emotion. She didn't know how to die, she only knew how to give death. She had slashed both her wrists and stabbed the knife in her throat. She must have lost consciousness, lying next to the coat. They took her pulse and blood pressure. They moved her onto the stretcher, and the young trainee applied pressure on the wound in her neck. The neighbors have gathered outside the building, women mostly. It will soon be time to fetch the children from school. They stare at the ambulance, puffy-eyed. They cry, and they want to know. They stand on tiptoe, trying to make out what is happening behind the police garden inside the ambulance as it sets off, sirens screaming. They whisper to one another. Already the rumor is spreading. Something terrible has happened to the children. It is a handsome apartment building on Rue d'Hauteville in Paris' 10th arrondissement, a building where neighbors offer friendly greetings, even if they don't know each other. The Masses apartment is on the 5th floor. It's the smallest apartment in the building. Paul and Marianne built a dividing wall in the living room when the second child was born. They sleep in one half of that room and cramped space between the kitchen and the window that overlooks the street. Miriam's like Berber rugs and furniture that she finds in antique store. She had hung Japanese prints on the wall. Today, she came home early. She cut short a meeting and put off the examination of a dossier until tomorrow. Sitting on a folding seat on a Line 7 train, she thought about how she would surprise her children. During the short walk from the metro station, she stopped at a baker's. She bought a baguette, a dessert for the little ones, and an orange cake for the nanny, her favorite. She thought about taking the children to the fairground rides. After that, they would buy the food for dinner together. Mila would ask for a toy. Adam would suck on a crust of bread in his pushchair. Adam is dead. Mila will be too, soon.
I have chills everywhere. I have tears in my eyes. Thank you, Leïla. I'll serve us some tea now, if it's okay with you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Pour se remettre dans cette émission. Merci. Parce que c'est fort quand même. So, Lullaby starts with the account of an infanticide. Your first book was about a woman without any sexual limits, and now it's the dead child. You like being transgressive?
I don't think about being transgressive. I realize my subjects are transgressive afterwards, through people's reception of my books. When you are deep into writing, there is no realization of that at all. The moment I sit at my working table, all of my boundaries have already fallen apart. It's such an immense space of freedom that transgression doesn't even exist there. There's a space where it's not about subversion, it's about immersion, where moral and decorum vanish. It's not about pleasing anyone. The only thing that matters is to tell the story exactly the way we wish to tell it, and to go as far as possible in the account we make of it. I love this quote of Jean-Paul Sartre that says, "The writer, a free man addressing to free men." That's exactly it. Literature is a space of absolute freedom.
This book is also about a modern lifestyle, that of a urban, educated, privileged family. You're not very tender with the bobos, and since we hang out in the same neighborhood, you and I'm wondering why you're being so cruel with your own social background.
Well, first of all, because I like my literature to be cruel. I find it interesting. On a personal level, I love cruel novels. I don't like novels that butters you up, who are sweetly naive. You can't make good literature with good intentions. And as you pointed it out, I am cruel to bobos, but I myself live in a bobo neighborhood. I am a bobo. I embody all the flaws and all the qualities, and being the object of my own cruelty makes me even more cruel. It allows me to feel even freer to point out my own flaws because they are mine. So yeah, I like being cruel, but I also take interest in being tender with my characters and point out that the bobos are far from being this caricatural social class that reactionary French journalists like Zemmour, Nolot or Finkielkraut would depict. Bobos are often caricatured as happy idiots.
Like do-gooders.
Yes, that's it, do-gooders. People whose only obsession are gluten and cycling. I try to prove that it's way more complex than that. There are people who try hard to embody progressive values, to respect the environment, to respect their peers. It is true that they are full of inconsistencies, that sometimes when the values are confronted to the reality of a world, they don't know what to do anymore. But at the same time, who does? Upper-class citizens or working-class people also have their share of demands and contradictions. I felt the urge of demonstrate that it's a cultural class with great qualities, that it's not as plain as we might think it is. I'm always paying attention to the fact that they are often thrown under the bus by Marine Le Pen and the conservative right wing. To me, it is no coincidence. They embody everything those people hate. Gender equality, openness to immigration, a freer, more open lifestyle, letting others live the way they choose to. We need to keep in mind how Austrian novelist Stefan Zweig described his contemporaries in the 20s. His Jewish friends, gypsies, foreigners who basically lived in Viennese coffee shops. who tried to live an independent lifestyle, people who could have been qualified as bobos from that time. Well, they are the ones who were wiped out during the 30s by European fascists. They embodied a certain vision of progress the fascists hated. So we need to be careful when it comes to a harsh criticism of the Bobos figure.
Que le fascisme déteste. Donc il faut quand même se méfier d'une critique parfois trop obtuse du bobo.
It's so refreshing to hear this. What I love about this book is that it comes up with the idea that motherhood does not have to make you happy.
Ah oui, je crois qu'il faut complètement séparer les deux.
Oh God, yes. I think both of those concepts need to be completely separated. Being a mother provides a lot of things, great joys, feelings, and fullness. With newborn babies, for example, there can be moments of extraordinary tenderness. It brings a lot of sensation. We share a lot, we transmit a lot, but it has nothing to do with happiness in its essential meaning. It's not like you become a mother and suddenly some kind of essential completeness builds up inside of you, and you live happily ever after. That's a cultural invention that accommodated very well a specific part of the population, who are men. They loved the idea that women had this natural instinct that you should never contradict because it is bad for the species' survival. We had to preserve that instinct, sanctify it, and since we had that marvelous link to our children, why would we even bother getting out of our homes? Why would we want to do anything else since we feel so good attending to our children? Saying that being with our children doesn't make us feel good is contradicting 100 years of speeches that impose this happiness to us. We didn't have a choice between being a mother and feeling happy. An unhappy mother was an outcast, a bad woman. I claim the fact that sometimes, yes, sometimes, playing with my son bores me. Sometimes I just want to get out of my house and it doesn't change anything to the love we feel for our children. But it's not bringing us more happiness than it brings to the fathers who also need to maintain a social and individual life. I am totally opposed to the idea we should lock up mothers in their maternal instinct, or some form of happiness that would supposedly come out from an hormone. That's ridiculous.
Ni dans un instinct maternel, ni dans un bonheur qui viendrait de je ne sais quelle hormone ridicule.
Even kids cannot feel the void of loneliness.
Well, yes, totally. He doesn't feel the void of loneliness, and it was violent for me to realize it because I've always felt very lonely, and I will probably feel that way until the end of my life. So, even if it doesn't really make me unhappy, sometimes it can make me feel a bit melancholic or sad. It makes me feel alone in a room full of people. So when you are a young woman and you are influenced by centuries of social conditioning, you kind of hope becoming a mother will prevent you from ever feeling alone again. You think you will create a small being that will understand you perfectly, and even if he doesn't, the love you will feel for him and the love he will feel for you would fill all those moments of loneliness and sadness. And then suddenly you realize it's absolutely wrong, that it's even quite the opposite when you feel alone with your child, having troubles, not feeling well, and he chooses that moment to selfishly insist on playing with his toy. And the only thing you can think of is to cry. Well, you feel even more lonely. You feel lonely because you are failing to being his mother. You can come to take an interest in his little toy. That kind of loneliness is very hard to identify, very hard to recount, but it does exist.
It feels so good to hear you name it. That's so liberating for women.
Yes, of course. It's a way to liberate them from that burden. I don't see why, to this day, we should bear the brunt of guilt of those dark thoughts on our own. I feel like the fathers are very liberated from all that. If a father comes home after a work day and doesn't feel like playing with his kids, we will have the tendency to say, "Leave your father alone, he's tired." If a mother comes home and sits on her couch saying, "I don't feel like cooking, I don't feel like playing," well, we'll say, "What is she doing? She's failing at her job." When a mother comes home, she has to start doing her second job. And even if it's not said out loud, we are conditioned by our upbringing, by seeing our mothers do it because that's just the way it was. So we're going to get up, start cooking, picking up stuff, cleaning up, and complain about the fact that nobody else does it. It's sad that we are still locked up in this vicious circle. Modern men are mature enough to understand that not only we need to share the chores, but we also need to reject those little sentences, like, oh, poor him, he travels so much, he never gets to see his family. And when it's the mother who travels a lot, oh my God, those poor kids, they never get to see their mother.
They miss their
No,
mommy.
that's just not possible. I can't stand that type of remarks anymore. It's utterly irritating.
You know what? All this is linked to one thing, one only thing, the
There it
uterus. It's my obsession, so I'm going to ask you the question I ask to every woman I meet here. How do you get along with your uterus?
En ce moment, c'est un peu particulier parce qu'il est habité, donc...
Well, at the present time, it's a bit particular because it is inhabited. I could almost say it is haunted. So we get along quite well, since it's alive and it's living its most beautiful moment. Well, it's kind of weird to bear something inside of your body that is supposed to have a purpose, but who most of the time is useless. 100 years ago, women had 16 children in a lifetime, so it almost always had a purpose, which is not the case anymore. Nowadays, we forget about it most of the time, and we can stand to be constantly brought back to it socially, culturally, no matter how little use we make of it. So, today I'm pregnant. And it's true that being pregnant, your perception changes because the magical fact of being able to create another being makes you realize, currently in my body, there are 2 hearts, 4 lungs, 4 kidneys. That magic keeps fascinating me. It's extraordinary. And that fascination is absolutely unrelated to my gender. It's related to biology, which makes it nonetheless fascinating. So yeah, I'm currently quite admiring my uterus and what it is capable to do.
It must be the hormones. So, to get back to Lullaby, this book carries also a strong social criticism. It is about the nannies, who are often immigrant women, which is not Louise's case, the nanny of the book. In your novel, the mother doesn't want an Arabic-speaking nanny. Was it something that came to your mind as a mom?
Well, of course, I think every parent who ever hired someone to take care of their children ask themselves billions of questions. What should be my criteria? How will I choose them? How should I act towards them? Should I be familiar, somewhat friendly? On the contrary, should I remain professional or even cold? It's a very complicated question, and to get back to our previous conversation, it's even more complicated for the bobos, for people who try hard to do the right thing, who already have a certain familiarity with domesticity but question their relation to it and try to have the best attitude possible. So, of course, I got to some questioning myself, and the only answer I got was, you never know what it is to do well. And you can do well all the time. You can try every single time, but at the end of the day, it's quite similar to educating children. You know you will make mistakes. You know there is going to be days when your attitude won't be the right one. You will either react too strongly to something quite banal, or on the contrary, your reaction won't be enough regarding something important. It's a day-to-day thing, a complex relationship, hence a fascinating one.
I know you admire Viviane Meyer, this weird nanny who photographed her world for years without ever showing a single picture to anyone. What do you like about her?
Well, that's it precisely. The secrecy. I love the type of very secret characters. I think she's an absolutely fascinating woman. Starting with her fascinating appearance, she was so tall. And the idea of that woman following a family, looking after their children for years, the children remained very attached to her. They are the ones who took care of her photographs when she passed away. And she was living in that small maid room at the very top of the house. I read her boxes filled with photographs were so heavy the floor started sagging under his weight. Actually, they were not even photographs, but film strips, since she didn't even develop the images. Living like that in secrecy is absolutely fascinating. And what's even more particular was the choice of the photography in the 50s. It was a woman who took pictures without having any idea of what they will look like, and who's going to keep on doing it with blind confidence. For a writer, it's a fascinating character, since as an artist, we do things to see them, to live them. We want the book to exist on a bookstore shelf. I found it extraordinary to be able to devote your whole life to something in an absolutely gratuitous way, without even knowing what it looks like. It's a magnificent artistic gesture.
Who are the women you admire, the women you read?
Well, there are two women I admire greatly. They really are my traveling companion. I read them again and again. I really love them. There are two women who come from two completely different eras, but say quite similar things. Virginia Woolf, a British writer, and Fatima Mernissi, a Moroccan sociologist who was a professor in prestigious American university for a long time. They both are women who reflect on women's presence in public spaces in the world. What is it like to be a woman who enters a restaurant, a library, a woman who gets married and therefore gets a home, a place where limits are given to her? What are boundaries to a woman? Is it the same for men? How we as women live with invisible boundaries that men doesn't necessarily see, that even ourselves try to deny their existence sometimes, but they keep coming back. One woman reflects on the notion of harems, since she was born in 1914 in a harem in Fez, and ends up becoming a professor. I think it was in Princeton or something. So very free, living in cohabitation with a man she wasn't married to. What a journey for someone who was brought up by a woman who basically never even saw the streets, who didn't even know what they looked like. And Virginia Woolf, a woman who strolls around British University and tries to get inside their libraries, tries to sit on their lawn, who just tries to be a woman in a public space and who is constantly told it's forbidden for a woman to be here, get out. We almost forgot what it was like. Now we are obsessed with prohibition linked to minorities, which is absolutely normal. It's appalling, and I get it completely, but we have a tendency to forget that in a very large part of the world, women are still being treated like some quote-unquote races or minorities during the apartheid or ghettoization periods. Today in France, women do not have access to some places. I was looking at the news the other day, and there was a short report on the fact that there are entire neighborhoods in which women cannot even get inside a coffee shop. That is just unacceptable.
We just cannot walk freely in the streets at night.
Yes, we can't walk. That's what I keep saying all the time. My husband, for instance, it amuses me how he's still not fully conscious of that fact. So I'll tell him, I feel like comfort zone don't exist when you are a woman. I feel like we are never undisturbed. Being in a public place, in the streets, in a public transportation, we always feel worried. There's always some concern, something bad that can happen due to the fact that we are a woman. There is always the possibility of getting assaulted, molested, raped, simply because we are born a woman rather than a man. And that's a reflection that I think should be discussed at the highest levels of society. How is it possible that a woman's body still is an intruder in the public space today?
Virginia Woolf happens to be one of the flagship authors of this podcast. Do you have access to your room of one's own?
Oh, yes. I have total access to my room of my own. And it's been the case since forever. I have parents who were very respectful of that, and I had the chance to meet a husband who is very respectful of that as well. So I have my room, my personal space that nobody touches, and I'm very often very moved by the way my entourage apprehends that room, which kind of sanctified itself years after years, since it's the place where I wrote and produced books that the whole world can now see and read. They exist. Everything that happened in that room now has a concrete existence, and that is what I value the most in life.
What does La Poudre mean for you?
Well, La Poudre, to me, is something quite feminine. It evokes rice powder, disguise, the powder you put on your face to change your complexion, to change your appearance. It evokes drugs as well. La Poudre means powder, cocaine, possibly because I read so many Russian novels. I love Russian literature. And in Russian novels from the 20th or 30th century, they call it Tokyo powder. Since at the time it was a product that came from Japan. So yeah, I think that's what La Poudre means to me.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank
Leïla.
you.
Thank you to Leïla Slimani for speaking up in La Poudre. Nouvelles Écoutes is the executive producer of La Poudre, a podcast produced by Aurore Meyer-Mailleux, prepared and recorded by Zisla Tortello, and mixed by Laurie Galigani. The English dubbing is made by L'Arrière-Boutique Studio. The signature tune is an audio sample from the song L'Appétit by Bonnie Banane. If you like the podcast, bless it with stars, preferably 5 of them, on Apple Podcasts. You can join us on social media. La Poudre is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also follow me on my social media. I go by Lorraine Bastide, and I post in English on Instagram. If you want to hear about other exciting podcasts produced by Nouvelles Écoutes, please visit our website, where you can also subscribe to La Poudre newsletter. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. This episode of La Poudre was recorded in a room of the Hôtel Grand Amour, one of the coziest, sexiest, and coolest hotels in Paris. I cannot thank them enough for their ongoing support starting right from La Poudre's very first season. If you book a room with the code La Poudre at the Hôtel Grand Amour, you'll get a 10% reduction on your reservation. You're welcome.